Imya Sajimbe Hanta Nauche Pudate Tayazuri Kinkwamuha Pyongyang Mama Nilam Manzwa Jintong Mune Sesani Jintong Woma Mini de She Biro Yoga Bare, Punzani the good Hogiro Leve Let me Sabiro Yoga Bare. Tine Adalu Nilam Hazwa Chentomuha သူရဲ့ဆက်ဆက်ရအကြောင်းရှိသေးတယ်ဆိုတာပေါ့လေဆက်လက်ပြီးတော့ဖြည့်ရှင်းပြဖို့ပါပဲ
Yesterday, Sayadaw explained with the help of an illustration or a number of illustrations how the obstacles or hindrances of Kilesas, hindrances to the unfolding of wisdom, how these Kilesas can be overcome only if one practices in a correct way, or rather that this overcoming of the hindrances of the Kilesas is very crucially related to the correct method of practice. Today, Sayadaw will further explain this point.
Shima Byagan Shiuzwa Loki Ubama Lamia Lina Pyovyasi Nimiyetanamha Yoga the Ku Mimima Yoga the Ku Pilla, the Yoga Lekanta, you know. See to Kalayaw, the Latin Nana. The yoga go a mere pia on Kuta people Yechivada. Edlu Kutayama Jije the yoga so ye Siawan Tandoyame, Tama yoga so ye no Ain don't say body. Me wayama. Yoga Pia ye to it. Say Nilam Manzoa Savu Suraga, Siawa New Jaja Yuama. Kama Mobusoloshi, Sivilima Pare, and Nyungu, Jajan and Apayama. New Jaja Lema Yuene Pelema Buma Yeta, Senior Lema Papenero, Sigu, Senidija Masata Fu. Dalaway. Nilam Manzawa Pyongyang Atunai at wet Nilam Mani Patamazo Lilavu Mimiavu Janavu Dari Luvare Songmatavu Dari Luvare.
To start off, an example may be very useful. Say that you are afflicted with a certain disease, illness. If you're aware that you already are unwell and that you are being afflicted by that particular disease, and yet you do not seek medical care, you do not take care of the body, but just allow the disease to slowly eat you up, then obviously you are opening the doors to death. On the other hand, if one wishes to effect a complete cure of that particular disease, then one can either go to see a physician, or one can make use of some medicine, some drug which you are quite familiar with. If one goes to see the doctor, then it is imperative that one must listen to what the doctor has to say, go through the diagnosis, and the doctor's prescriptions should also be followed. The doctor's advice, if it is properly and conscientiously followed, will lead to a quick recovery and possibly a complete cure. In the same way, if one is quite familiar with that particular ailment and one resorts to some medicine which is readily available in one's home, then again one must read the instructions properly. What is the correct dosage? What are the directions for use? And only after one has studied these directions will one be able to make use of that medicine in an effective and useful way. This holds too in this whole spiritual practice, this whole spiritual path. Prior to walking this path, one has got to make some preliminary studies. One has to study the directions. One has to perhaps discuss it with others, ask a lot of questions, get involved in discussions to clear your doubts. And if you're practicing under a teacher also, then to be ready to accept instructions and to follow and practice according to what you have been told.
ဒါကိုနည်းနည်းဥပမာလေးချက်ထွင်ပြောရမယ်ဆိုရင်တကယ်ကျမ်းမာရေးလူလာတဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်ဟာရှိဥစွာခုခံကာကွယ်ရေးကလိုပါတယ်။နောက်တစ်ဆင့်ယောဂဖြစ်လာလို့ရှိရင်ကုစားရေးအဲ့လိုတယ်။ကိုယ်မှာကာကွယ်ရေးနဲ့ကုစားရေးနီးလာနေမသိဘူးဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ကျမ်းမာအောင်ဘယ်လိုလုပ်နိုင်ပါမလဲ။ဘယ်နည်းနဲ့မှမလုပ်နိုင်ဘူး။ဒီတော့ရှိဥစွာကျမ်းမာကြောင့်နီးတွေပေါ့လေလေ့လာပါတယ်။လေ့လာပြီးတော့ကာကွယ်ရမယ်ကြိုတင်ပြီးတော့ယောဂဖြစ်ရင်လည်းပဲကုစားရမယ်အဲတော့ကာကွယ်ကုစားလို့ယောဂတွေငြိမ့်သွားလို့ရှိရင်မိမိတို့ရဲ့ပျော်ရွှင်ချမ်းမြေ့ရေးအကြောင်းဖြစ်သွားတာပဲ
Even in respect to health, to general health too. If we are concerned about our health, and that is something which everyone should be concerned about, then it will be to our advantage to be aware of various sorts of health therapies. There is the preventive therapy and there is the curative therapy. Preventive therapy refers, of course, to the things that you do to prevent illness and ailments from attacking you. Exercise and so forth, and diet. And curative therapy is used when one has been attacked by any disease in spite of preventive measures that was taken. So if one is quite aware of these two types of therapies with regard to health, then it would certainly conduce to one's own welfare and happiness.
Edilo Kagwe Kuzaye Niya Sazaya Dritabido Nelo Yogari Kimbi Solushi Piochun Chami Laro Jamai Laisam a jury Nale Lare Jury Nale Laro Aripoma Tambuta Lare Tambuta Lili Pubido Kagwe Kuzaye Yoga Kimpio Ye Lipu Lili Pubido Piochun Chami Yala Lili Dido Mimi Kanaguha Kuga Ari Boli, Turu Chaja Kauna. Erika Jaro Chacha Jamai Grumiside Bogurima Majamazia, a John Twilu Luelwene Yoga Pchitwa Melu Tumaro, Bahama Yoga Mapsipene, Chanyanta Nebody Pini Dalidi, Chia, and a Jamai Lisa a Jew of Pure Shin Chamini.
When one is enjoying good health, which of course is also a major contributory factor for happiness and well-being, then one can appreciate the causes behind our state of good health. On reflection, one can understand that it was because of one's knowledge of preventive therapy and curative therapy that has been predominantly responsible for one's state of good health. Not only the knowledge of those therapies, but the actual using of them, practicing according to what we know. And that sort of appreciation of those two types of therapies help us to have even more faith in them, more confidence. And we know that our good health has come about because of those things. And so we put more effort and we put more attention to make sure that we go through our daily exercise, for example, and we stick to certain diets and we avoid certain things. And we resort to medicine when it is necessary, and to certain sort of medicine, and so forth. So for a person who is in good health and who appreciates this, appreciates his or her own efforts made in maintaining this state of good health, then very slowly and gradually, but surely, her physical or his or her physical resistance would become more and more strong, more and more consolidated. For such a person with good physical resistance, then he or she would be less vulnerable to viruses and bacteria and other conditions that cause or that can easily cause an epidemic, for example. While others who are not in a good physical condition, who do not have good physical resistance, may succumb very easily to an epidemic, may fall victim to an epidemic. The person who has been using the preventive and curative therapies in looking after his or her own health would feel really very strong.
Do I feel Mimi won't ma Kuseta yoga mudi Pilavi, so ye Judin Kawa City to it. Don't like Hanesi, Chola Hanesi, Nick Hanesi, Sadi body. Judin Kawa City to level to a Mamido, sea level 2 tabi, Jamai level Grusavi, so ye. Tabi dogo Jamai, counter.
Especially in times of an epidemic, a local epidemic, then the health authorities would probably be mounting a campaign to give vaccinations to people as a form of preventive measure. And for that, a very health-conscious person, very conscientious in keeping healthy, he or she would also go to have that vaccination. And on top of one's already strong physical resistance, that vaccination will certainly consolidate one's health.
Kagwaye Kuzaye Yoga Ninja Miyacha de Poku Miyaro Piochun Champion Mashibe Melo Kona Poku Maro Turu Chajaji Kagwe Kuza Yoga Ninja Yaniro Emanango Piochun Chamira Sura Leve Shinchibu Luare Dilupia ha Ayensi Lucia Piochun Champion Naboya Kagwe Kuza Ninja Ye Atwe Loading Loaded a Lodi was Sinidija Lulu Sura Timatobi Coach Java.
A person who is not very interested in maintaining good health, not at all interested in these preventive and curative measures with regard to good health, will certainly be very vulnerable, very vulnerable to ailments and diseases and so forth. And as all of you know, being in bad health is not a very good state. It's a state of suffering. It is certainly not a factor for happiness and well-being. So if one can fully appreciate the fact that happiness and well-being depends on taking care, on this care for one's body, in terms of understanding and putting into practice preventive and curative measures, then that is a great boon in itself.
Dalove Sema Kukan Ari Kauye Atwe Say Champion Yego Piesi no set at it, the Yazuri body. Kimbo ya Chigandila Agent, Tamari Pina Agent body. Erarigo Nimama Chaumaswa Chintoya Bade Chintono Achansa say yogari, Alasa say yogari, Anusa say yogari body. Dear Jintum Akon the law. Wa yogari, I level the PV yo video. Now Pio Dora. Boyali, Bozella video shooting up Kagwe, Kukan Kagwe, knee. Paula Lucien level, shoot my video Kagwe, knee, Kuzare knee. Either low bit or Dani had the chain at the chain ha, Lava da Kilidari, Ninja Yala, Chimay Yala. Chimay Yala, Pure Swin, Chami, Luniara, when I count of it.
Kaguanese.
Was a boy, a lady, Pozella video. See us a chin like a social shoe.
Just as physical resistance is an important factor that helps to maintain physical health, so is spiritual resistance with regards to mental health. Spiritual resistance or resilience is that quality of mind that is able to withstand attack by the Kilesas. And if one is able to cultivate, one is able to take certain measures, certain preventive as well as curative measures to maintain good mental health, then this spiritual resilience or resistance will very gradually and naturally and surely develop and strengthen. When spiritual resilience or resistance is fully developed or is well developed, then one can be quite free from our neurosis, and psychosis, and our various mental afflictions of the mind, of the spirit. The measures are of two kinds, the preventive and the curative. Preventive measures with regard to mental health or spiritual health refers to a diligent effort made in activating penetrative and accurate and precise mindfulness on whatever objects that arise from moment to moment at any of the six sense doors. The curative method refers to a direct confrontation and noting of the Kilesas at the moment of their arising, in spite of preventive measures taken to be mindful with all processes that occur. At times there may be certain weakness, certain gaps in our line of defense, and when the Kilesas do infiltrate, immediately one goes in for the kill. There is no space for hesitation, and that is the curative measure.
Kuka Akamboya, Shen Yubiro, Jamai Lisa, the Loto Due, Say Chanda Yidwell, Chen Yuare. Chen Yuara, second name Alabe, Junior, Tilao the Mario Pinayo, Tari Lila Jen Abi, Mimitanama, Pipoise absent. Second name Ala Many time Alabol, in I name Ala Juzani. Say ma, a cha alla anu. စိတ်ယောဂပေါ့လေကိလေသာတွေပေါ့လေကင်းစင်နေတာကင်းစင်နေတော့တနေ့တဲ့တနေ့ဟာမတူသဘောမှန်လေးတွေလည်းသိလာတယ်ကြောင်းကျိုးဆက်ပုံတွေသိလာတယ်မမျက်စိရဲ့သဘောပဲဆိုတာသိလာတယ်သိလာတော့ဒီကအရှင်ရအားပြည့်လာတော့ငါကစိတ်လှုပ်ရှားเสียအာယုန်နေနဲ့ကျုံသွားတဲ့အခါမှာလွယ်လွယ်လောဘဒေါသဖြစ်သွားပြီမဲ့လို့ဒီကအရှိန်ရှိနေပြီဆိုရင်လွယ်လွယ်နဲ့လောဘဒေါသကိလေသာတွေမဖြစ်ဘူးငြိမ်းချမ်းရနေတာငြိမ်းချမ်းရနေတော့ဒီမှာရွှင်ပြီးတော့ချမ်းမြေ့လာတာပဲဖြစ်လာတာဒီအကျိုးလေးတွေပေါ်ထွက်လာတယ်ဒါဟာ spiritual resistance ဆိုတော့လေဒီမှာစိတ်ရခုခံအားတွေကောင်းလာလို့ခန္ဓာရင်ရှိလာတာဆိုတာမှသွားပြီးတော့သိရပါတယ်
Just as we need to take time to take care of our physical health, you need time to take your exercise daily, you need time to figure out your diet for the day, and so forth. So too, we need time to develop that spiritual resistance that Sayadaw talked about. We need time to cultivate practice of sila, of samadhi, of panya. And we need time to be mindful, and it takes a lot of time. Every second and every moment, as long as you're in this intensive retreat, you are required to be mindful at each moment of occurrence of any mental or physical phenomena that might arise at any of the 6 sense doors. It's only by this diligent and conscientious effort in being mindful that one can slowly but surely stamp the Kilesas, wring the necks, and eliminate them, uproot them. Kilesas, the coarse ones, the middling ones, and the very subtle ones. And when that happens, when one's spiritual resistance or resilience of mind is quite well developed, then it will be one would be very, very healthy spiritually, mentally. In spite of having to encounter unpleasant or very tempting objects, pleasurable, desirable objects, or encountering very disagreeable, distasteful, disgusting objects, then one's mind will be quite unshaken. One is not engulfed by desire. One is not swayed by aversion. One is not veiled by delusion. So at that point, one can say that one's spiritual resistance, mental resilience, is truly the main fact, the main cause behind one's mental health and spiritual well-being.
အဲဒီလိုလက်တွေ့တတိပဋ္ဌာန်လုပ်ငန်းနဲ့ကာကွယ်ရေးကုစားရေးဒီအလုပ်တွေကိုလုပ်လို့စိတ်ရဲ့အနှောက်အယှက်ယောဂါတွေကင်းငြိမ်းတဲ့မြတ်ကင်းငြိမ်းသွားပြီထိုက်တန်တဲ့မြတ်ကင်းငြိမ်းသွားပြီဆိုရင်ပျော်ရွှင်ချမ်းမြေ့မှုအကျိုးလေးတွေပေါ်လာတော့အဲ့ဒီပုံမှာတန်ဖိုးထားလာတယ်တိတ်ကောင်းတယ်ဒီအနှောက်အယှက်တွေကင်းလို့ဒီလိုပျော်ရွှင်မှုတွေချမ်းမြေ့မှုတွေရတယ်တိတ်ကောင်းတယ်ဆိုတာနားလည်လာအကျိုးသိလာတော့ဒီပုံမှာတန်ဖိုးထားလာတယ်တန်ဖိုးထားလာတော့ပိုးပြီးတော့ကိုယုံကြည်ကြည်နဲ့ Sana pian pian tabi the guru sai la de. Guru sai li pobi do three the madi pinya boli. Kagwe yeri, kuza yeri, a kaun li. Kaun li pobi do yoga ria leve, say yoga ria le ninja yali. Ninja yali pobi do pure chin champion who yali live.
When a significant level of spiritual resistance is achieved, then one will be quite undisturbed by the Kilesas, even if they have the chance to pop up. One can experience a very deep peace of mind, a tranquility of mind, a bliss, a sort of happiness of freedom. Freedom from disturbance, freedom from harassment from the Kilesas. If one is able to experience that peace of mind, that tranquility, that happiness, one can surely appreciate that once that state of well-being has come about because of this practice of Satipatthana in both aspects of preventive therapy and curative therapy. So that appreciation will, of course, inspire oneself to be even more enthusiastic and conscientious and meticulous in one's practice, knowing the benefits of the practice. One's put further effort into the practice, and it goes on. It's like it's starting off a chain reaction, and the more effort that is put in, the more mindful one becomes, and the more one is able to penetrate into the Dhamma, the stronger one's spiritual resistance becomes.
To action, people go near Nyan Sin Lilo Yola be Lucamagon Chanda, let Lamam he Sick on a dinyan to delu. Tamego, my beer in a chanda, you yala, we say, no. A boko ha the atom who Beroma Masumjan Hino.
This is especially so in the case of a yogi who has penetrated the Dhamma to the level of insight that is able to see the arising and passing away of phenomena. At that point, that yogi will be able to experience a sort of happiness that far surpasses any sort of sensual happiness that he or she has ever experienced before in the world. With that personal experience of that otherworldly, so to speak, happiness, one's faith and confidence in the practice becomes very, very deeply rooted. It is an unshakable conviction that the path that one has trodden is a very beneficial one. And it is said that such a yogi will never be able to give up that practice or renounce that practice as useless.
Vipassana Nyane Yinche Pizolo Nezo the metaphor lock Yashi Dwabi, Domo Manya Punyane, Nina Neva, Yamop Beauty Dwabi, so ye. A pen is set it. See yoga, the Mipja the Kalep. Edru Jautamati, Palomia went down Lesora. Come Mami to Chibu Babe. But what Amakanje Yadwabi so ye. I told Yachi the boy Amakanje Kaleo. I will be with them, be me die. Eddie Bokuma, Pello say Chanda who the Piwan in Lesora. Twechiba.
However, for a yogi who has gone beyond that particular level of insight and achieved the noble path consciousness that has held Nibbana as an object, is completely free from any of the mental diseases, so to speak, that are connected with the states of war. This, of course, refers to the Kilesas that will appear or arise in one's stream of consciousness and make one produce karmic activity that will eventually cause resultants to be, that will eventually cause rebirth in the states of war. So that sort of class of kilesas is completely eradicated, uprooted. If one is able to achieve that state, become a stream entrant, a noble one, and one realizes that fact that one is completely forever free from the states of war, from rebirth in the states of war, you can imagine the sense of relief and happiness that one can feel. It's like, it's a very, very sound life insurance. It's a samsaric insurance.
The Chivada, you let me Drivita, the Yaro, Buddha, Luraja, Atoye, Tete, Gobuago, a show Peter, Peter, a commie in the Bomio Machine, would it? A mere daddy, see a daddy, go to time of shit daddies without daddy, G. Kindly Dabe. You kind of Luya Pilara, the Dalia Duri, Erarigo, Sorry, show me Luci, Lua Chanda, Bemachina Maromale. Dilo Tuijare, Piole Piojare. A Pilevet in Javare.
Some people are very critical of Buddhism, of Buddhist teachings. They say that it's very gloomy. You only talk about impermanence, about suffering, about what is not your own. And if you practice the teaching, they're just asking you to look into all these nonsense. People say that it's a big loss to be so foolish, to give up all the sensual pleasures that one can conceive in this world, and to go through all that suffering, to go through having to buy all that jazz about impermanence, about suffering, about non-self. People ask if it's not foolish to give up this wonderful sensual pleasures that we have been blessed with in this world.
chiuပြောတာလည်းရှိသေးတယ်အဲ့ဒီလိုတရားဌာနသွားရောက်ပြီးတော့ကိုယ်ထောင်ချထားတာတဲ့ကိုယ်ညှင်းပန်းနေကြတဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်တွေတဲ့ချမ်းသာမှုတွေကိုလက်လွတ်ပြီးတော့ပေါ့လေတက်မဲ့ဒုက္ခရှာနေကြတဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်တွေလို့ဒီလိုလည်းပဲသူတို့ပြောကြတယ်ထင်ကြတာ
Some people go so far as to say that people who follow the Buddhist teachings are like sadists, looking at all this suffering and making themselves suffer when they have all the opportunity to be happy and to enjoy the sensual pleasures in life. Yeah.
အမှန်စစ်တော့အခုလိုလက်တွေ့သတိပဋ္ဌာန်တရားတွေအားထုတ်ရတာဟာကိုအောင်နိုင်ဖို့ပါပဲကိုမအောင်နိုင်လို့မကောင်းတဲ့အကြံစီတွေမကောင်းတဲ့အပြောအဆိုတွေနဲ့မကောင်းတဲ့လှုပ်ဆောင်ချက်တွေရှိပြီးတော့ကိုယ်လည်းမသက်သာအများလည်းပဲဆင်းရဲတာတွေသူတို့မစင်စားမိလို့ပါ
Perhaps these people do not realize that the whole of the Buddhist teachings is geared towards a conquest of the self. To conquer oneself so that one can be free from the prison of Kilesas. One can be free from the clutches of Kilesas. For if one is still under the influence of the Kilesas, of defilements of mind, then you can see for yourself how dangerous it will be. Being under the influence of defilements of mind, we can be a source of great danger to ourselves as well as to other beings. Perhaps these people do not quite understand. ဒီအကြောင်းအရာနဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးတော့ဘုန်းကြီးကထုတ်ဖော်ဖို့မလိုပါဘူးစိတ်ကိုလှုပ်ချင်တိုင်းလှုပ်ထားပြီးတော့ပြောချင်တိုင်းပြောလှုပ်ချင်တိုင်းရှောက်လှုပ်နေကြလို့လူချင်းဥတည်ပြက်ပြီးတော့ချမ်းသာမှုတွေမရကြတဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်တွေအများကြီးရှိတာပဲအဲ့ဒါတိတိကျကျမြင်နိုင်ပါတယ် It's not really quite necessary for the Sayadaw to point out that there are many cases of people who have had to undergo a lot of suffering in their lives because they could not exercise any sort of control over their minds. Lacking in self-control, they have been led astray by their defilements. They have been guilty of performing very atrocious deeds and speaking and indulging in speech which have caused a lot of havoc and injury to other people. Now, what is it? တူနဲ့တူမကျေနပ်တာတွေမတည့်တာတွေဒေါသဖြစ်တာတွေမာမာနတွေဖြစ်တာတွေလောဘတွေကြီးလာတာတွေမိသားစုချင်းဆွေမျိုးချင်းအချင်းချင်းပေါ့လေတိုင်းပြည်နဲ့တိုင်းပြည်ပေါ့လေအဲ့လိုဖြစ်လာပြီးတော့ကိလေသာမိတွေတောက်ပြီးတော့ကဘာသူကဘာသားတွေဆင်းရဲဒုက္ခတွေရောက်သွားတဲ့အထိနည်းနည်းလေးမျှော်မှန်းပြီးတော့ကြည်ကြပါ Perhaps you could make use of imagination to see how this great fire of defilement has been the cause for disunity and misunderstanding and hatred and violence, aggression, has been the cause for the splitting up of friends, of loved ones, of families. how this huge fire of defilements has been the cause for wars to happen, for cross words to occur, for people to get angry over one another, for the exchange of angry words, of blows, exchange of fire, exchange of lives.
The Niapin level, Kuseta de yoga, during Kawemu, Kuzamua, Majida, the yoga, a colon careo, flu, yoga mulu boli, careo, piana dwada boli, piana dwada, Duka the Yojare, the Kuye, Jama ye, Crusai Lucy. Hey, the Guya Navy, a Didi boli, Jama the county Lucy, Bear Kuseta the yoga, the Lane Nomine. Alun Chanda one.
Just so, also when there is an epidemic in town, and if the health authorities do not take the trouble to help to vaccinate people against that epidemic, or to help to educate people to take preventive measures, then one can see how the epidemic will spread and cause a lot of suffering. But if one is a very conscientious person with regard to health, one takes extreme care and with regard to one's health, then one will develop that physical resistance. That physical resistance which is able to fight against the epidemic disease. And if each person has enough physical resistance, then it will be very obvious that an epidemic will have no chance to occur.
Sepinya loka ma TV kore yoga amana jau sia kaung ne. Edi yoga Mipia on Soviro, Sete Bani Yaboli, Shao Prilu, Kuzare Kamagu Gababoma, Edi Tibu Yoga, Mu Piatalogo Pieni.
In the field of medicine, TB or tuberculosis was a much feared disease in the past, in the ancient times. It was a deadly killer. But through the decades, the amount of energy that man has invested in research and in finding various ways and means to combat this deadly disease has led to a point in world history right now where this disease of tuberculosis is almost extinct.
The Gui Jama ye, Didi Grusa Jalushi, Yoga Mu Pianhe the Lu, Yoga in Yemiro, Pure Chin Chamem Pianhe the Lu to wear. Utiatu des the Gui Jama Yav, say Jama Yawu, to a Jusa Nijara. The Gui Pianhe the Yoga, they go on a Wuya to a Jusa Nijara. Jusa Yoga Piabi Solution Yoga in Yemi Solution. Oh. Pure Truyền chami later, when I go now, they near Jara. You go my yoga piao, Matayare, Tumia Duka be a jansi lemashi. Tumia 6 years zeta, Cosia zeta, a bios who you never came and the Yakeme. Tumia with Mataya, Pure, Mataya, and Muri, or Erari Kendwa. Kendwa. Tumia leve chanda to we go to a docam yoto who error let way about
it. If individual physical health is well attended to, each person is physically fit and has enough physical resistance to be able to fight viruses and other carriers of diseases, then that would be a major contribution to society, in the sense that it will help to curb the spread of diseases. It will help to curb the spread of epidemics. For an infectious, contagious disease may be arrested because people are physically fit, are healthy. This also applies to the task that all of us are engaged in at the moment. The spiritual task of cleaning oneself of the Kilesas, this task of developing that spiritual strength, or rather that spiritual resistance, is very important. It is a major contribution to society. If one is able to rid oneself of the Kilesas, if one is able to cultivate that high level of spiritual resistance, which means that one is quite free from the clutches of Kilesas, from the influence of temptations, of aversion, and so forth, then you can see that it is a boon to ourselves. We are free from assault by the Kilesas. We are free from harassment, from being molested by the Kilesas. We are able to enjoy a peace of mind, able to enjoy that bliss, that freedom, that feeling of liberation from being oppressed by the defilements. And once the defilements are quite scarce, they make themselves quite scarce from our stream of consciousness, then we are quite pure at that point. We will not be given to entertaining any thoughts of greed, any thoughts of aversion, of wanting to cause harm to other people, of jealousy, of miserliness, and so forth. One will not be overcome by conceit and all the rest of defilements, the whole array of defilements that would normally pounce on us at the slightest opportunity. So for that sort of person who has conquered himself or herself, would you not agree that he or she would be a boon to society? Precisely because of that one person, others too are safe. They are safe from the Kilesas that could manifest through that person. Because one has had the basic sila, one has had the basic good state of mind, where the Kilesas are no longer manifested through oneself, and therefore others too will feel safe and happy in our presence. Some people maintain that the task that we are all involved in at the moment is very selfish. If
ကိုကြားမှာပြုလုပ်ခြင်းအပြင်ကုသတတ်တဲ့ယောဂါတွေကင်းသွားပြီဆိုရင်အမြင်ကပတ်ဝန်းကျင်ဘယ်လောက်အကျိုးပြုတယ်ဆိုတာစဉ်းစားဖို့ပါပဲဒါလိုပဲအခုစိတ်မှာမိမိလည်းမသက်သာသူတစ်ပါးလည်းပဲဆင်းရဲဒုက္ခရောက်စီနိုင်တဲ့ဒုက္ခပေးတတ်တဲ့ကိလေသာမျိုးစီတွေတတ်နိုင်သမျှပြတ်အောင်ကြိုးစားလို့ရှိရင်ကိုယ်မှာကိုယ်နှုတ်မူရာလေးတွေယဉ်ကျေးပြီးတော့ကြမ်းပါပြီးတော့ပေါ့လေပျော်ရွှင်ချမ်းမြေ့မှုလေးတွေရနိုင်တယ်သူများလည်းပဲဒုက္ခမပေးတော့ဘူးဒီနည်းလေးတွေသူများကိုလည်းပဲဖြန့်ပြလို့ရှိရင်သူများလည်းပဲစိတ်ချမ်းသာမှုတွေအပြည့်အဝရသွားနိုင်တယ်ဘယ်လောက်အကျိုးပြုတဲ့အလုပ်လဲဆိုတာနှိုက်ရှင်ပြီးတော့ကြည့်ဖို့ပါပဲဒါတကူကောင်းဆန်တဲ့အလုပ်မဟုတ်ပါဘူး
Such a notion should not be left unchallenged. You may well ask yourself, is it very selfish for a person to take care of his or her own health as a sort of preventive measure against attack by a disease? Or for a person to undergo curative therapy in order to cure oneself from a certain ailment? Would you not agree that for one who is able to follow or who undergoes these preventive and curative therapies, he will undoubtedly be able to develop and strengthen his physical resistance, which in the long run will be a boon to society. In the case of an epidemic, for example, if people are well and healthy and have good physical resistance, the virus will not be so infectious. They will not be able to infect one person to another and thus spread the epidemic. In the same way, the practice of Satipatthana meditation as a path of purification, as a way of cultivating, developing, strengthening, consolidating that spiritual resistance, is also a boon to society. Once a person's spiritual resistance is well developed, he or she will no longer be a cause of harm to other people. And if one is able to share the Dhamma with others, be able to share our experience and our practice with others so that they too will be able to have the opportunity to cultivate that sort of spiritual resistance and to strengthen it, to maintain it, then we can, in fact, dream of a society of people who have good spiritual resistance and therefore are able to live in harmony and in peace.
ချိန်ကြတော့ပါပြီကာကွယ်ရေးကုစားရေးကိုကြမှာရေးအတွက်ကာကွယ်ရေးကုစားရေးပြုလုပ်ပြီးတော့ယောဂငြိမ်းချမ်းရေးရရှိခြင်းဟာပျော်ရွှင်ချမ်းမြေ့မိမိတို့ရဲ့ပျော်ရွှင်ချမ်းမြေ့မှုရဲ့အရင်ကပဲဆိုတာပေါ့လေသဘောပေါက်နားလည်ပြီးတော့စိတ်မှလည်းပဲကာကွယ်ရေးကုစားရေးပေါ့လေစေယောဂတတ်နိုင်သမျှကင်းပြောက်ရေးတွေဟာမိမိတို့ရဲ့ဤသတိပဋ္ဌာန်လုံငါ့ကိုလှုပ်တဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်များရဲ့ပျော်ရွှင်ချမ်းမြေ့မှုရဲ့အကြောင်းပဲဆိုတာသဘောပေါက်နားလည်ပြီးတော့နိလမ်းမှန်စွာနဲ့အားထုတ်ပြီးတော့မိမိရဲ့စိတ်မှာ spiritual resistance တွေပေါ့လေရတယ်ရအောင်ကြိုးစားပွားများအားထုတ်နိုင်ကြပါစေ
We're running out of time again, and the Sayadaw would like to conclude today's discourse by hoping that all of you will be able to appreciate the fact that good health is an important factor for happiness and well-being, and that it is also brought about by undergoing preventive and curative therapy. And in the same way that this path of Satipatthana Vipassana meditation too is a cause for health and well-being, and that for one who undergoes preventive and curative therapy according to this meditation technique, then he or she will be able to develop, cultivate, strengthen and consolidate and maintain a sense of spiritual resistance. Sayadaw truly hopes that all of you may be able to develop and maintain and achieve a high level of spiritual resistance so that you can be a boon to society.